Hey guys, so this is a bit of a list video where I'll just list some things that I think are quite good in the game. So I thought I should come up with some kind of lame titles such as the top 5 essential spells to most certainly pick when you're playing the corresponding lore. So we'll just, I narrowed it down to just 5 essential spells. There's 10 lores I know, but there's 5 lores I don't play that often actually. Um, or their laws that am not that impressed with personally. So I'll just go to the number one lore. Well, it's not in any particular order, but just the first pick for me. So this is Perception of Strength from Cosmology. I think it's a really good spell. So it's on an 8 plus, 24 inches augment or hex. Target gains +1 strength and +1 AP, or -1 strength and -1 AP. So why is this interesting? So imagine you're playing some kind of army armor save focused army, and you're able to just deny your opponent his AP capabilities. Then basically you just add armor to your own guys, and at the same time you also reduce his strength. So it's a bit of a double spell in that regard, having two effects at once. So either it's to solve the issue where you face a lot of armor and it helps you both to wound better and to penetrate better. On the other hand, it makes sure that your opponent is way worse at penetrating your own armor. So yeah, the best setup I would say for this is to have a wizard master, and you make use of the Cosmo attribute to get it down to 6+ to cast. And then you're all set. So as a minor thing is that the Empire of Sunstyle can have this spell on their buff wagon, so you can cast it repeatedly as a bounce spell. So if you combine it with some other scary magic, you can make sure that your opponent cannot dispel your first spell that you try, basically. Because if you can stack 2 of these, or even 3 would be pushing it, I think. But if you get 2 of these through, then basically you're just making units that are normally quite bad into really potent units. Yeah, so this is my number 1 pick. So the important thing to note though is that it's mostly useful in situations where you can make use of both the strength and the AP buff or debuff. So if you only, well, you don't ever only need to get more AP or less AP, because the strength is always going to be useful. But if you only need the strength and you already pierced the enemy's armor, then maybe it's better to cast another spell. Yeah, and the last thing is that it has 24 inches range, so it's gonna be in range of probably your own units at all times and of your enemy units at a lot of times. So that makes it a really good all-round spell to have. Yeah, and it's also not really dependent on specific stats of your units, because most units, if you go to a +1 or -1 strength, it will be affecting the performance of the unit. Whilst, for example, with offensive and defense, if you get +1 offense, it often doesn't really make a lot of difference. So let's go to the next one. So that's from Divination. I think No Thine Enemy is actually the best spell of this lore. So a lot of people take Unerring Strike and Fate's Judgment. I think Fate's Judgment is a very dicey spell. Like, you can always roll a 1 on the amount of wounds that you do, and then probably your target still has some armor save. So and Unerring Strike is nice, but against some targets it's not that impressive either. Like, for example, at some Resilience 3 cavalry, it's definitely not the right spell to cast. But anyway, so No Thine Enemy, I think, kind of always does something, because it will always affect either your or your enemy's 2-hit roll, and ideally, of course, both. So then it also doesn't really matter what kind of troops you are fielding. Well, there's some differences, but if you basically go from kind of bad troops to troops with decent defense, or from elite defense troops to incredibly high defense troops. So I'm mostly talking about the offensive, defensive 3 and 5 scenarios, I think, in matchups where your opponent doesn't have parry. So if you are facing someone with ideally defensive 3 and you have offensive 5, you can go to a 2+2 hit, and you can force your opponent to go to a 5+2 hit you instead of a 3+4+. So that is a very good scenario, for example, really tilting the balance in your favor. Also, agility buffs are very rare in the game, so there's only the Potion of Swiftness, this node and enemy spell, and the Deceptive Glamour and Witchcraft, and there's even fewer armies that can combine Witchcraft and Divination, I believe. It's only currently Dread Elves and Vampire counts. Am I right? I'm not even right about Vampire counts, I think, because they can take Cosmo but not Divination. So I think it's only Dread Elves right now that can combine these two. But Dread Elves already have a very high agility, so they don't really need this spell that much to get the agility fix, and I'd rather go to this Deceptive Glamour to get my agility fixed for Dread Elves. But for a lot of other armies, this is a very good way to tilt the matchups of what they're facing. Just by casting this, you can basically deny your opponent to charge your entire army. Because with the aura spell, you can get a 6-inch aura. If you have some mages in the neighborhood, you can extend the range of your aura. So if you have 2 more mages within 12 inches of the caster, which is quite reasonable for some armies, you can go to a 12-inch aura, and that will cover probably nearly whole of your army in some cases. So that is a very valuable spell. So normally for all of these spells, I would just consider them without any special tuning of your army towards them. This one, especially if you tune your army towards it, it's a really decent buff. Yeah. So for the aura, it's an 11 plus for a Wizard Master, which is, I would say, actually just a little bit too high, because if you want to 3 dice it, it's quite risky. Whilst 4 dice seems kind of excessive. So if you find a way to get an extra +1 on your Wizard Master, or if you find a way to otherwise boost your casting, it would be quite advisable. So then we go to the next one, which is going to be Breath of Corruption of Occultism. So Occultism is a very aggressive lore, and it has a very nice set of spells. So Pentagram of Pain heals your caster, Grave Calls does a lot of damage if you're close to your enemy. Then you have the Rot Within, which gives minus offense and plus offense to your caster. And those are the most notable, I think. So it does have a lot of very interesting spells, but most of them have some conditions to them, like the range or the fact that your caster should have ideally already have taken a wound or be in an ideal position within the enemy army. So I think Breath of Corruption is a very good contender for this pick. Mostly because the only constraint that this spell has is that it has to have a decent target. So and then with that target, I mean a target to target with your breath attack, because it gives you a breath attack either on your caster or within 12 inches on a single model, or on a champion within a unit. And you can use this breath attack just normally. So also if you have marched with your unit, you can still use it. So in the movement phase, you don't have to regard the spell. You don't have to consider the fact that maybe your opponent will dispel it or anything. It's just a breath attack that you can even make to have 18-inch range if you sacrifice a model or a couple of models, depending on the leadership of your unit. So it's only a 5+ on the caster himself, so you can also leave this till the end and just try to one dice it, and then by doing so you just pressurize your opponent to keep 2 dice to dispel it. Because if you have a wizard master, you can cast it on a 4+ on yourself. Your opponent has to dispel it on a 5, so he has to effectively just keep 2 dice back. So that's a good tactic for the spell, I would say. Unless you really want to be sure to use it, then you can obviously focus a bit more on it. So it can target anyone within 12 inches of the caster, and then you have 18 inches of range with the spell, or with the breath attack. So discounting the base size of your own models, you basically have an effective 30-inch range, a non-linear range. So that is very good. Um, and just the fact that it's magical and toxic is amazing. So for some targets, magical might not be that necessary actually, but it's just good against spirit host and raids and the like. But just the toxic component of doing 2d6 hits with strength 3. Strength 3 is a bit lackluster, but the AB10 is really nice. So this all combines to make it excellent against cowboys, most notably. So a lot of these horse-mounted models that you used to see at least a lot, they didn't have a lot of resilience, like resilience 3 or 4, but they did rely on a lot of armor or even rerollable armor to get their work done. So this is basically just a counter spell to these guys, and also of course to small knights units on the flanks. It's really easy to just cripple these units, maybe even deleting them at all. And the funny thing about this spell is that it also works in combat, just to generate combat resolution and to tilt duels all the way around. So especially if you can use it with Dread Elves, you can just have a champion that has charged, so he goes to agility 6. For a black tower guard or a Blades of Narb champion, it even goes to agility 7. Or a Dread Knight also goes to 7. And then if you go into the duel, there's a high likelihood that you will be striking first. So you first on your target deliver the 2d6 toxic hits, and then you still have your attacks off your model. So in this way, you actually outperform a lot of combat geared characters. So that makes it really interesting. Also, the casting value is not too high, so I would definitely say that this is a spell that is always useful. Just it doesn't matter what kind of matchup you find yourself in. So then we go to shamanism. So shamanism is a lore that I don't play myself that often, but it's a lore that I do encounter from time to time, and there's this one spell that really stands out for me, which is Totemic Summon. So shamanism has a couple of great spells. So first of all, there's just number 1, Awaken the Beast, that buffs your troops in combat. And there's the Break the Spirit to give someone else dangerous terrain on 1s and 2s. And the -1 to hit in combat. And that's also a very good spell. But I think that this one is still the best because it's universally applicable. So the Break the Spirit is only useful really once you go to this this state of board where you both want to charge in, but you're not really sure about the charge, or you definitely want to have to charge yourself, because it kind of denies your opponent from charging at you through the dangerous terrain. And then there's some units that are not really affected by the dangerous terrain it creates through the effects of Strider, for example. So Totemic Summon is applicable in every single turn of the game, I would say. Most notably from the start, but as you go further into the game, it's still very useful. So this does a lot of things basically. Well, it's all described in one line because it summons a totemic beast within some distance of the board edge. but the effects of this are quite multifarious. So you get a free chaff piece, and your enemy has to consider the 10-inch zone with respect to that, and then you still have to add the base size of the totemic summon to that, I think. Um, so you get some free chaff piece that your enemy can use just freely at a 10-inch zone from the board edge. This also includes the board edge of your opponent. So if your opponent is really pushing back on his own deployment zone, you can just put it in front of him because it's within 10 inch of the board edge. And this also gives you 2d6 strength 3 hits anywhere within 16 inches plus the base size from the sides of the table. So this is 10 inches plus the 6 inches for the breath weapon. And that the 2d6 strength 3 doesn't have any AP on it, but a lot of the chaff units on the flanks, they don't have that much armor either, so it's a great tool to just diminish them or to get a panic check somewhere. And usually in these scenarios, a panic check is quite possibly just the one thing you need. And then as a last result, you have a free large beast with 4 strength 5 attacks and a stomp. I would mostly say that this is just a side effect of the spell rather than the main goal of the spell, because just having this free chaff piece somewhere on the board that you can possibly get at all times is already quite an influential effect. So unfortunately it's not like a dragon or anything, but still this large beast with 4 strength 5 attacks definitely is worth a mention in my view. So what it normally turns out to be for me is just the one spell that I want to keep my dice for. So I think if you really want to get the most out of this spell, you would have to couple it up with some other very interesting magic. So I think orcs and goblins or ogres are the armies that can really profit from this. Ogres because they can also access Thaumaturgy, but this would require you to get 2 casters, I believe, 2 wizard masters. Because with Thaumaturgy, a wizard master is quite nice. So that would be a lot of points spent probably. So that's also why you don't see it a lot, I think. But with orcs and goblins, you can just get a wizard master on shamanism and get some adepts on some other laws for some very interesting combinations. Then we'll go to the last one. So the last one will be witchcraft with Will-o'-the-Wisp. So Will-o'-the-Wisp is a it's I guess probably the least universal spell out of this entire list, just because of its range. So it requires you to be within 18 inches of your target. If you're targeting your own guys, this is okay. If you're targeting your opponent's guys, this is not a lot, really. So the good thing is that witchcraft generally is a lore that affects movement. So it is more okay to be within 18 inches than you might assume, and I still personally have to learn to play with this lore a bit more. So having a wizard master on witchcraft kind of nearly guarantees that you get 2 spells off that give a -1 on movement for 1 enemy unit each. So if you go within 18 inches, just within 18 inches of your target, if the spell works, you're gonna have them on random movement. If it doesn't work, you can still give them a -2 movement debuff, so that they will most likely not be able to charge you anymore. So what does it do? It just gives your target random movement 2d6 or 3d6, you're choosing. So I would say that for your own unit, you will most likely want to have the 3d6 move. For your enemy units, you will most likely want to have the 2d6 move. So this gives your unit fearless because random movement gives fearless. And you can really use it to enable or deny charges. So the way it enables charges is to not definitely or not really extend your threat range, but more to just make it universal in terms of direction. So you can just shove up your Death Star if you play a Death Star, in the middle of the board, and your opponent is going to try to normally try to get out of your arc of sight so that you cannot charge. You just give this unit random movement 3d6, and now it can charge into any direction it wants. So your opponent is kind of obliged to respect your threat range of about 18 inches. 18 inches is stretching it. But if I were your opponent, I don't think I would go within 15 inches, preferably, of this unit. Just because the chances of it happening are still quite considerable. So if you cast this spell on your opponent, you will most likely go for the 2d6 version. With an average of 7 inches, this really is not a lot of threat that comes from the unit. And then this spell is mostly effective on units with high movement, because with high movement, basically you add 2d6 to your move for your charge. You basically just remove the movement part of this enemy unit for its charge. So you can diminish it by quite a lot in this way. Yeah, so another thing it also still enables is to get random movement in situations where you have had combat. So if you have random movement, you don't roll 2d6 or 3d6 and take the highest for Swift Stride. You just roll the random movement that you have. So if you cast this on your unit that is going to have a pursue move or an overrun, it's going to go 3d6 instead of the 2d6, making your chances of catching your target actually way higher. So that is really nice. The only last thing that is probably more annoying to your opponent than to yourself is that it dictates the movement order also. So screening the unit that has the random movement is going to be quite difficult in the sense that the random movement unit has to move first. So if you target a shooting unit of your opponent, like a wizard bunker, that is just standing in the front line for some reason, and you cast a spell on it, your opponent basically has the choice of either coming towards you, which is possibly a bad choice, or going towards the flanks, turning his unit in that way, or going backwards and just effectively taking his unit out of the game for like 2 turns. So either he comes towards you, opens up his flanks, or he goes away. Either situation is probably quite fine for you. Yeah, so that is my sum up of the top 5 essential spells to most certainly pick when you're playing the corresponding lore. I hope you enjoyed this video, so if you have any comments about these spells, then please let me know, and I'll see you the next time.